can recall being around the Casa Italia in the 1970s when Gente Mia was being published and printed by Father Feccia in the basement here. I remember seeing Feccia go turning the wheel for the printer and the page Gente Mia coming out. And I mastered or studied Gente Mia very much, and then had an opportunity in later years to meet Joseph Tusiani, and I was in awe of him. I think he is more important to understanding Italian-American experience, the Italian-American experience, than even Frank Sinatra, if you want to go that far. Today we have a tribute to him and his work. In a sense, he is not dead. We have a video of him speaking, and he was a wonderful performer as well as a poet. He understood, obviously, language and cadence as better than any actor who would be reading his poetry. And so I feel an obligation to spread the word to the rest of the world about this great genius who was among us and who was so adept at portraying the Italian-American experience. So one of our volunteers, one of our very faithful volunteers, is with us today, and Raffaele Di Zenzo has published a number of articles about Joseph, and he was involved with an earlier celebration that we did with Joseph as a participant from long distance. But I'm going to call on Raphael to give us a little presentation from his experience and his study.
Thank you. Welcome. And so in the library we have a special issue, Italica. It's about the Italian professor, teacher of a professor of Italian. So a special issue dedicated to him. One article is from Paolo Giordano, which unfortunately passed away just recently. And then we have Tamburri, Julian Tamburri, and they're going to be speaking. And another one is Ryan Calabretta-Sajder, and so they're going to be speaking briefly too. Then I have this article here about Joseph Tusiani, which was published in Italy, some Italian and English translations. But since he was a poet and writer of 4 languages, okay, so Italian, English, Latin, and of course dialect of this region, from Gargano region. I'm going to read one poem in Latin. It's about the Cuban Missile crisis, which was resolved peacefully, luckily, fortunately, and he celebrates such peace agreement. Allora, Alba Domus.
What page? What page?
What's Alba Domus? Anybody?
What page?
I don't know.
No.
Alba Domus, White House. The White House. Okay. Tandem et de Kremlinus conciliantur. So finally, the White House and the Kremlin have reconciled. Missilibus cassis subscribunt fetus amoris. The missiles have been removed, and they have subscribed in agreement. Murus Barolini are growing where was the wall of Berlin. You, te pater omnipotens, iterum benedicimus omnes, you, omnipotent Father, we bless again, all of us. Qui in terra tandem miramur limen Olympi. Here on earth, finally, we can touch Olympus mountain. Then, in honor of his hometown, in Puglia, in the province of Foggia, near San Giovanni Rotondo, he wrote a little poem like in praise of his hometown, but like very funny. But it's in dialect, in Gargano, but it's understandable in Italian. Seppure stegni lontano, even though I am far away, io sono sempre paesano. I am always a paesano. Che pur se parlo inglese, and even though I speak English, io sono sempre San Marchese. I am always from San Marco in Lamis, his hometown.
Well, thank you very much, Raphael. And we have the next feature is a video that I took in 2012. I visited Joseph in New York in his apartment in a swank area of New York, and he read poetry for me from Gente Mia in English and in Italian. We'll play this, and I hope that the technical aspects of it are good, but if they're not, please note that it's on YouTube, and you can find it under my name or his name or whatever on YouTube. And if we can cue that up, and we'll run it now.
Or maybe just as your unbridled flame would undivided scald this hemisphere and turn it into ashes, I fulfill my human fate by giving you, O Son, a chance of mercy on my helpless life. Civis Americanus sum, I swore allegiance to the flag of 50 stars. Long live America forevermore. Now I belong where countless wounds and scars create a mourning and an epic song that neither time nor silence ever mars. Now, only now, for every suffered wrong do I discover who I am at last, the multitudinous Italian throng. I am the present, for I am the past of those who for their future came to stay humble and innocent and yet outcast. I am the dream of their eternal day, the dream they dreamed in minds bereft of light. I am their darkness, and their only ray, their silence and their voice. I speak and write because they dreamed that I would write and speak about their unrecorded death and night. Oh glory, I'm the bread they came to seek, the vine they planted to outvanquish doom, their most majestic and enduring peak. For this my life, their death made ample room. Carme bisecolare, mi si lasci stasera pensare alla forma delle stelle, non all'illimite magma che confonde l'umano pensiero, il cui trionfo è il dubbio, né ai traslucidi suoni che dal centro delle infinità elettrizzano corpi celesti vicini e remoti, creando soli oltre il solo a me noto. La forma, mi si lasci pensare alla forma delle stelle stasera. Qualcosa mi dice che anch'io son nato sotto il segno d'una di esse, fatta a foggia di nave, affollata di povera gente, silenziosi emigranti, la mia etnica stella. Due lingue, due terre, forse due anime? Non oso chiederlo a questi fiori familiari, ciascuno dotato d'una singola lustra corolla. Ne oso domandarla a quella quercia severa dalle lunghe e profonde radici che si arrestano innanzi all'ostacolo del vicino ruscello, quasi abborrendo estraneità di suolo. Chi può dunque risolvere l'enigma del mio giorno? Due lingue, due patrie, forse due anime. Sono un uomo io, o due strane metà di uomo? Sobria luce indifferente che innanzi a me con lucido ghigno tramonti, poiché non v'è risposta al mio dilemma, mi consolo pensando che anch'io, al pari della terra che non deve proclamare d'un tratto il tuo completo trionfo, devo, in attesa della mia aurora, diventare la notte di me stesso, o forse, come la tua incontrollata fiamma distruggerebbe questo emisfero riducendolo in cenere, anch'io adempio al volere del fato, dantoti o solo un'opportunità di misericordia su questa mia vita indifesa. Civis Americanus sum, ho giurato fedeltà alla bandiera di 50 stelle, e viva l'America, l'America è viva. Ora appartengo alla terra, le cui ferite creano un'alba ed un epico canto che né silenzio né tempo potranno affievolire. Ora soltanto per ogni ingiustizia subita finalmente scopro la mia identità. Sono la enorme folla italiana. Sono il presente, perché sono il passato di quanti per il loro futuro son giunti umili e innocenti eppure scacciati. Io sono il sogno del loro giorno eterno, il sogno sognato in miniere senza luce. Io sono il loro buio e il loro raggio supremo, il loro silenzio e la loro voce. Parlo e scrivo perché loro sognarono che io scrivessi e parlassi della loro morte in nessun registro notata. Oh gloria! Sono il pane che essi vennero a cercare, il tralcio piantato per la loro unica estasi, il loro più solenne picco duraturo. A questa mia vita ha fatto ampio largo la loro morte.
Yes, we'll end it there. And thanks to everyone who is watching it, because the technical stuff wasn't perfect, but you get the idea. And a lot of that poem, that poetry, we could use as our motto for the Italian American Studies Association. This is why we exist, because of the sacrifices of the previous generations. And the poet was there telling us the reason for his existence and what he does. So now that we have seen Joseph in action, I'd like to turn it over to Anthony Tamburri and let him tell us a little bit about the video that was done with the Italics series a few months ago. Anthony, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Before I introduce the video, let me just say that for those of you who are not familiar with poets reading their poetry, not all poets do a really good job of reading their poetry, however good that poetry may be. That's been my experience. And Joseph is one of the few that I've met whose poetry not only is excellent, but who knows how, who knew how to read his poetry in a way that really captivated, I think, the reader. And you can see in that, as he did also in public performances, he's very much aware of his audience, looking into the camera every now and then. So I just wanted to mention that because he was really excellent at that. So what the Calandra Institute has a TV program that's existed since 1988. It's called Italics, and once a month we air 28 to 29 minutes of cultural information. And so, having known about known that there was this collection being organized for Lehman College, where Joseph taught for many years, and from which he retired in the 80s, we decided that once it was up and done, that we would meet with Marguerite Zappa, from whom you're going to hear in a few minutes, from Marguerite, who is the curator of that collection. It's a wonderful collection. It's really a generous, in many ways, a generous act on the part of Lehman College with respect to Joseph, particularly, but also to the fact that Joseph Tusiani is who Joseph Tusiani is, was who Joseph Tusiani was. That is an excellent poet, an excellent translator, an excellent essayist, and an excellent novelist. People don't realize that Joseph also wrote fiction. However, has always lived between these two worlds, the American studies world and the Italian studies world, each of which said, with regard to Italian American or Italian diaspora studies in general, no, you guys, the Americans would say you guys belong in Italian, and the Italians would say you guys belong in America. And Joseph did a wonderful job of living on the hyphen and negotiating that existence. Anyway, I want to give it over that. Well, we're going to see 15 minutes of the segment, correct, Dominic? And then after that, we can hear from Marguerite Zappa on the intricacies of putting all of this together, and maybe what one or two of the treasures are that we may not necessarily know about. So, Dominic. Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. On this episode of Italics, we visited at Lehman College the recent Joseph Tusiani collection, and we attended the celebration of 20 years of ILICA, the Italian Language Intercultural Alliance, at Tribeca 360. An extensive collection of works by acclaimed poet, translator, humanist, and scholar Joseph Tusiani is now available to the public, courtesy of the Leonard Leaf Library at Lehman College. The library acquired Tusiani's archival collection and makes it available for further study and research through a dedicated website. The collection was curated by Marguerite Zappa, who assisted Professor Tusiani over the many years in preserving his legacy. Italics visits Lehman College to speak with her.
Never take the world for granted. For your lesson, trees were planted. When you eat the sweetest fruit, think of years of bitter root.
Welcome to Italics, and thank you for being here with us.
It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you. We are right now in special collections at Lehman College, which is housing the Professor Tusiani collection. An enormous collection, one vast in scope, rich and brilliant in its content. It's the largest collection that Lehman has ever had.
You started this project when?
March 30th, 2022.
Okay, and it's still ongoing.
It's ongoing, yes.
Right.
The website is up.
Yeah.
It's been finalized, but the collection continues to evolve because this is the year of the 100th anniversary of the professor's birth. So they started with events since January, and they're ongoing. So besides the 108 boxes that are already, that you could see in special collections, we have another 2.5 large boxes called an addendum file, which ultimately will be added to the website.
Never take a thing for granted. You are what the dead once wanted. If your hand can light a room, think of caves so dark and doom and gloom.
There's everything here.
Virtually everything, virtually everything. I mean, the collection is divided into 19 series. It ranges from the professor's authored and translated works, to the translations of his works by others, to contributing author, to articles, essays, and books written about him, to music, to dissertations in Italian, English, and French. One of the series is interesting. It's titled Personal Notes and Comments in Texts. This reflects the professor's personal and eclectic collection of books with his notations and thoughts throughout. One of the books is on display in the exhibit. It is a Latin-French poetry dictionary, a 984-page volume, which Professor Tusiani read from cover to cover, bearing his notes on every single page, a true affirmation of his passion for words, their meaning and source.
Granted, a stone will cancel and seed. Granted, a wind will vanquish leaf and light. But if through scorn or providential deed I shall be given the supernal right to linger as a breath and as a name beyond the hushing of both speech and sight, what will these children, past their present game, think, harsh adults, of this archaic me and of my words that sounded all the same? Will what I call a battle prove to be the feat of one more Don Quixote facing monsters that rise from neither land nor sea? Play on, my future judges.
He didn't come here, I think, as the typical immigrant came over. He was already a professor.
Right. He was already
teaching. He had his
23 or
PhD.
4, right?
23 and a half.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
right. But the idea was that they were going to go back.
Right, well.
My father had come to America 6 months before I was born in search of work. He was a dilettante. He had a philodramatic and he performed, he put up many plays. I met my father when I was 23 and a half. I had just received my PhD from the University of Naples. And I came to this country with my mother. And my mother had been there with me all those years. I wrote a book about my meeting with my father. La parola difficile, the difficult word. Oh, siamo cresciuti disgiunti noi due. Tu senza figlio, io senza padre. L'ultima, la meno definibile tragedia dell'emigrazione è questa. Abitua col tempo anche il pensiero a rassegnarsi a mancanza d'amore, anticipando così la morte.
He did go back in 1954. That's when he wrote The Return.
Right. In English.
In English, and this was the amazing thing. The 1956 prestigious Greenwood Prize from the Poetry Society of England. The first, quote, American, unquote, to have received this, and ironically, not submitted by him. It was submitted by Frances Wentworth, Francesca Vinci Guerra, who was already here, an established author, took him under her wing and introduced him to literary circles. It was just phenomenal.
So a poetry reading is a very hard thing. You think that the poet comes here, he doesn't have to prepare, and he just reads. No, he can destroy his audience forever. Because if we do not take something home with us from each poet, it means that a poet has been a failure. We have to take something. Poetry, true poetry, that something, that intangible something that makes poetry, wounds us. And we know that that wound will never heal. It transforms us, an image, a metaphor, something.
What is interesting among his masterful translations, such as the complete poems of Michelangelo, Dante's lyric poems, Leopardi's Canti, Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered and Creation of the World, Boccaccio's Nymphs of Fiesole, Lust and Liberty, the poems of Machiavelli, probably it's Pulci's Morgante that renders itself unique.
Yeah.
For Professor Tusiani was the only literary scholar to have translated this massive epic poem of 28 cantos, 35,000 verses. I believe it took him 6 years to do this. Consider Lord Byron attempted to do this, but gave up after the first canto. In his essay, The Translating of Poetry, he writes in part, to achieve an intuitive agreement of inspiration between poet and recreator, the translator must be a poet who knows profoundly the language from which he translates.
I made Michelangelo's poetry known to the Anglo-Saxon world because he was not known as a poet. They know him as the genius architect, the painter, a sculptor. I remember even President Kennedy said, I didn't know he was a poet.
So this came to be when then Senator Kennedy was campaigning for the White House. And one of his stops was the College of Mount St. Vincent, where Professor Tusiani happened to be teaching at the time. In the interim, the professor's book, The Complete Poems of Michelangelo, had just come out. Kennedy, recognizing the name, said, so you're the Michelangelo man? And the professor said, yes, I am. So Kennedy responded, well, I had no idea that Michelangelo was a poet. If I become president, I shall invite you to the White House. And the rest is history. He did.
To be believed, a child has crossed his heart and hopes to die. Sweet child, ferment in flesh and smile, little sparrow, hopping and hopping for your crumbs of life. Boundless are cross and death, and truth is narrow.
Poetry is sound, but also something else expressed through sound. This something else is thought, feeling, color, and rhythm, blended in a most mysterious and even illogical manner for the achievement of a most limpid and logical unity. Personally, as a musician, I would describe musical notes in the very same way, thereby definitively stating that music instinctively factored in Professor Tusiani's creative process.
Femmine con tanta con che secchiera e addenette che pezzuliavano e all'imugnala a fare cielo e chiacchiera doi vicchiaretto cu furticche fusera.
He played the organ. He had a Hammond organ and played the mandolin. His ability to improvise was extraordinary. I mean, this goes back to his childhood. I mean, going to church, and here's where the religious factor. He loved being in church, and he had this phenomenal voice. I'm sorry we don't have a recording of it,
Yes.
but people used to flock to Mass just to hear this child sing.
We should say that as a child, he was also connected to a famous Pugliese, right? Padre Pio.
Padre Pio, he was
Pio.
altar boy.
Exactly.
He was the altar boy to St. Padre Pio.
Right. And he had this great voice.
Well,
He's had
that's
this great
just,
voice.
you know.
This, yeah.
There's a cute story about that, too,
Is there?
if I may. Oh,
Okay.
yes, there is. I believe he had gone to a wedding, and he had to speak. And after he gave his speech, a young child went over back to, I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, to her parents, let's say, and said, was that God? So I wasn't surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
Very charming.
We have here in front of us, of course, the 3 volumes that he translated of his sort of anthology. of Italian-American literature.
You have Italian poets of the Renaissance in 1971. 1974 are the other two, The Age of Dante, and from Marino to Marinetti. We're looking at a cumulative 581 poems of 113 poets. His vision was very global. He also had an epistolary interview between himself and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This happened in 1959. He reached out to Martin Luther King Jr. to respond to a set of questions for the purposes of his writing article about him. In a letter dated August 8, 1959, King responded to Professor Tusiani's letter and to his questions. There were four. Basically, they concerned the realization of brotherhood on this planet, if things were better now, meaning 1959 or earlier. What I was impressed with when I found the book in the collection, Influenza Cristiana nella Poesia Negro-Americana. This is Christian influences on African-American poetry. The book begins with a lengthy introductory essay discussing spiritualism in African-American poetry, and then he continues to translate 31 African-American poets from 1700 to 1900 into Italian. I was just impressed by, even in poetry, it was eclectic, it was global. He wanted to know the poetry of all ethnicities, all nations. The awards are numerous here and abroad. Right. The tributes throughout his lifetime and after he passed, it was an avalanche. They're ongoing because this year is the 100th anniversary of his birth. You see this unveiling of the sculpture of the professor in the town of San Marco in Lamis. And in one hand, he holds the autobiographical trilogy, the first volume, La Parola Difficile. And on the backrest of the bench are the final three words of this beautiful poem, O bello immenso. And translated in English, the last three lines are, O great beauty, you alone prove the existence of God, who in every moment creates and keeps me alive.
So if someone wants to consult that, what do they have to do? Where can they find that? Is it available? Do they come here?
Yes, just call Special Collections. They can check whatever works they're interested in to view them. Some are obviously in the archival boxes that we have here.
They're all around
They're
us.
all around. They number 108.
Okay.
That's not counting the 2.5 boxes for the addendum files.
So let's look at a few things that we have here. So here, of course, we have a series of his books.
Yes.
We can just go through quickly. So
these are in dialect.
In
this
dialect,
is oil
right.
dialect. This is actually charming because we have a series of poems and letters to the professor from students. And this one he writes in Italian, Joseph, with your poetry, you make our fantasies soar. It's just incredible.
And so in San Marco in Lamis, there's also a Centro Studiani in San Marco.
Oh, yeah, Centro Studi, Joseph
Centro
Tusiani,
Studi,
absolutely. They publish everything. And this is, of course, Italica, the prestigious journal of Italian studies, where you submitted an essay. You, Paolo Giordano, and Ryan Calabretta-Sajder. Yeah, exactly. And here's the Michelangelo,
the famous
first one, and the updated.
I think that is really going to bring back to light the complete poems of Michelangelo, and also it's become a wonderful research tool because of the way Gianluca Rizzo put it together with a later critical edition in Italian.
Right, and this is Poesia per un anno, 90 poems by Baroque Press. Michael Tusiani had that published. And the professor selected the 90 poems, which was funny because he said, these may not be the 90 poems I select tomorrow. You know, because at that moment, that's what he picked. But it was in preparation for his 90th birthday, which would happen in 2014. And this is the most incredible 984-page Latin-French dictionary.
This is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite collections of his. And I think very important for who he is. So this is the Tusiani collection, right?
Yes, this is the exhibit which I say provides a sampling of what one can expect when they journey through this collection. Just knowing who he was, he said about fame.
Yes.
He said, if fame wants me, knows where to find me.
Right.
He wasn't anyone to get
No.
involved in the
Right.
semantics and
Right.
he just wanted to write.
Yeah.
And that was when he was at his happiest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Just,
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Quite impressive collection there. And I think now we're going to turn to Marguerite Zappa.
We are, but let me just make two comments before I pass it to Marguerite. First of all, we wouldn't have this collection if it weren't for Michael Tusiani and his family. First and foremost, they gave everything to Lehman and then everything else that's involved. And the other thing I want to say is you saw within the video, he was being interviewed for the Columbus Citizen Foundation. And if memory serves me correctly, the Columbus Citizen, Joseph Tusiani being honored by the Columbus Citizens Foundation was the first scholar/humanist to be honored by one of the national Italian American organizations. And that's very important because it's something that doesn't happen. And hopefully other organizations will take that as a hint, as a tool, a suggestion, whatever. Most recently, there was a second person, Katia Pasolini, who was honored this year by the National Italian American Foundation. We need more of those organizations to recognize our scholars, poets, writers, etc. Okay, Marguerite, it's all yours.
I am honored and privileged to have curated the Professor Joseph Tusiani collection, which is literally the largest collection Lehman has ever had. The project began on March 30th, 2022, but the collection continues to evolve. The press release announcing the website came out in May of 2024. But again, articles and books continue to be written about him, and events such as this one continue to take place in his honor, and the tributes are a constant. So much actually of what I would say was expressed in the video, but the collection is divided into 19 series, and it consists of 108 archival boxes containing folders that correspond to the created finding aid on the website, which serves as a directory to the contents of the collection. But again, those additional boxes, which mentioned in the video are 2.5, have now escalated to 3 because more works keep coming in. It's absolutely extraordinary. I was recently in San Marco in Lamis, the professor's birthplace, and I found some of musical treasures, actually. 2 of his original musical compositions, which he brilliantly orchestrated for voice and organ, music and lyrics by him. To look at this music, and being a musician myself, not having had formal training in counterpoint, structural analysis, theory, he taught himself. To look at this is actually impressive. He was a sketch artist. He was a painter. In essence, Professor Tusiani was a true Renaissance man whose genius embraced all the arts. Of course, we have in the collection the link that leads you to the remarkable recording of his poetry from Rind and All, together with 3 poems not from the volume, recorded for the Library of Congress at the request of President John F. Kennedy. And of course, there is also documented the epistolary interview between Dr. Joseph Tusiani and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This resulted in articles which Professor Tusiani wrote for the Italian language magazine Nigrizia, such as The Nonviolence of Dr. King, and in The Land of Lincoln, there is Little Rock. So all this can be found there. And this particular interview is not only in the collection, but can also be found in the papers of Martin Luther King, Volume 5, Threshold of a New Decade, January 1959 to December 1960. Of course, the awards have been innumerable throughout his life. 1956, of course, he was awarded the prestigious Greenwood Prize from the Poetry Society of England for his poem, The Return. It was the first time that this award had ever been given to an American. And he was the vice president of the Poetry Society of America from 1958 to 1968 and director of the Catholic Poetry Society of America from 1956 to 1969. In 2007, he was presented with the keys to the city of Florence for his immense contributions to the English-speaking world's knowledge of the great Florentine poets through his masterful translations, from Dante and Boccaccio to Petrarca and Machiavelli. And in 2016, he was named New York State Poet Laureate Emeritus by then Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, and the list goes on. The tributes have been a constant throughout his life. After his passing on April 11, 2020, and continue to this day. On July 4th of 2022, the municipality of San Marco in Lamis, his birthplace, renamed its Villa Comunale to be Villa Comunale Joseph Tusiani. This is what is inscribed on the left column as you enter the municipal park area. On the column to the right are inscribed the words, Al poeta dei due mondi e delle cinque lingue, figlio di questa terra e orgoglio sammarchese, to the poet of 2 worlds and 5 languages, son of this land and proud sammarchese. 2024, of course, saw the centenary celebration of the professor's 100th birthday, with events slated from January through May and beyond. The highlight occurred on March 28th of that year, with the unveiling of the bronze sculpture of the professor sitting on a bench in San Marco in Lamis. In one hand, he holds the first volume of his autobiographical trilogy, La Parola Difficile, and on the backrest of the bench are the last 3 lines of a most beautiful poem he wrote in 2016 titled O Bello Immenso, which is his tribute to the arts. This poem is one of 2,200 poems Professor Tusiani started to write after suffering a stroke in February of 2014. He was 90 years of age at that time. He continued to write prolifically throughout this time, not even being hindered by major surgery, which occurred in 2018, wherein the day after that surgery, if you can imagine, from his hospital bed, he wrote an extended poem titled V for Victory as a tribute to his physicians, and continued to write until his passing in 2020. Indeed, it was a period of prolificity that was absolutely astounding, and one for which I had the immense privilege to coordinate and document for him. Those last 3 lines on the backrest of the bench, which give tribute to the arts, are O bello immenso, tu da solo provi l'esistere di Dio, che in ogni istante crea e mantiene in vita il vivere mio. O great beauty, you alone prove the existence of God, who in every moment creates and keeps me alive. And this was so true of him. For Professor Tusiani was at his happiest when he was creating, when he was writing. And I believe that he and his works are synonymous. They are one. One does not exist without the other. And it is this legacy that he leaves to all of us, the gift of his humanity, intellectuality, and genius. And so therefore, should you come to New York, I welcome all of you to Lehman College in the Bronx to view this masterful collection. For as you journey through it, you will see that there is much to explore, much to learn, and much by which to be intellectually inspired. Thank you.
We understand that Michael Tusiani is on the Zoom call. Michael, would you like to say a few words?
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
First of all, thank you very, very much for organizing this, professors, and thank you, Professor Tamburri and Marguerite. And I see that Professor Munch is on the Zoom, and she was very much responsible for allowing us to do the archive at Lehman College. When I was, I was a reasonably decent student, but not a great student. And people would ask me, "Did you read this and did you read that?" And I would answer, "No, no." Why? Because of my brother. Whenever I had to read something, I just said to ask him, "Joseph, could you tell me something about it?" And he would tell me the whole story. So I didn't need to read anything. That's really the truth. And, when I was a kid, I remember his room, very small room. We had a sort of a railroad type of apartment in the Bronx. And his room was the first one to the left. And it was small. And on the wall, he had the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was a very, very big thing in those days. And I think, if I recall, there were 26 volumes. I can tell you that my brother read line for line most of those volumes over the years. And I would go to him. I remember studying economics, and Adam Smith wrote this book, The Wealth of Nations, and I was having a test the next day. And he was an economist and a philosopher, and my brother would comment about Adam Smith. He was just a remarkable human being, and for me, he was a source of inspiration and guidance. A very, very special human being. And I miss him terribly. And all I can say is I thank you for keeping his memory alive. And it is very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your support of him. It's been fantastic for us scholars as well. I count myself among the scholars, but mainly among the fans. Anthony, you want to finish up and we'll move on to the next segment?
Well, I think that, one of his impact is not only on scholars, those of us in the academy. I mean, Joseph is read by a number of quote unquote informed but general readers. But also, I would visit, since once I moved to New York, I'd visit him about once every 6 weeks or so, and we would chat. And he once mentioned to me that one of his greatest satisfactions in publishing was the edition he did, Dante for Children. And it was something he was extremely proud of. And he would sort of light up a couple of times that we've talked about it. And I think that's very important because he wasn't looking to be the so-called poet laureate, quote unquote, who lived in a little world, whatever. His message, his poetry was for everybody. Anyone who wanted to read poetry, that's who I think his audience was. And we need, poets, aspiring poets, young poets need to remember that he's an excellent model. And I will mention one of his one other person of his generation who actually called him a one-man industry, and that is Felix Stefanile. Felix Stefanile was the same type of person, someone who wrote for everybody, wasn't interested just in the sort of small group of poets in the literary salon. And Felix indeed called him and wrote the short introduction to now I'm forgetting now. Marguerite, tell me the play. If gold
should rust.
If gold should rust. Yeah. And and Joseph was tickled by it. In that, he called Joseph a one-man industry. That is poetry, prose, translations, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, yeah. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anthony. And we'll go now to Carla Simonini, who is a volunteer here at the Casa Italia, and who will talk about teaching the works of Joseph Tusiani to undergraduates. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Dominic, for organizing this. And I wanted to say, when Dominic approached me about participating, I was really hesitant because I look at all the esteemed colleagues on this panel who are scholars of Tusiani, everyone from everyone here on the panel present. And I'm not a scholar of him, but I have studied his works and I've incorporated it into undergraduate syllabi when I did survey courses on Italian American literature. So I said, well, if you think it'll fit, I can share what I've done, as a teacher. And Dominic brought up the question, well, I'm curious to know, like, how does Tusiani's work resonate with younger students, with undergraduates today? What does it bring to our understanding of literature, of identity, of ethnicity, of culture, et cetera? So I am very, very humbly going to try to answer that question by giving just an overview of my exact lesson plan. So I'm hopefully can share my screen with you. Let me try. All right, so this is what I would begin with. So he's introduced into a survey course of Italian American literature, and he's introduced after students have read what might be considered some canonical Italian American pieces of literature in prose. So they've already read Son of Italy by Pascal D'Angelo, which is the quintessential immigrant narrative of overcoming difficulties and becoming a published poet. Pietro Di Donato's Christ in Concrete, which is, again, talking about semi-autobiographically informed narrative about the death of a father, the son taking on his work role, etc. And also Helen Barolini's Umbertina, which is a multi-generational saga about the immigrant experience across 4 generations of women. So they've read prose, and now we're transitioning in the semester from prose to poetry. And as I said, most of the texts I've encountered up to this point have been narrative prose. They've been labor stories, autobiographies, or family histories. And these works are essential, especially in a tradition shaped by exclusion and survival when you're talking about the Italian American story. But Tusiani instead represents a different moment. His poetry asks, what happens after survival no longer needs to be narrated? Instead of telling stories about what happened, his poems ask, where do I stand and how do I speak from here? So this shift from narrative to lyric is not a move away from Italian American identity. I tell the students it's an expansion of how identity can be expressed. And importantly, this is where I see students from many different ethnic, racial, religious backgrounds connect to the work. Not because the poems erase difference, but because they engage forms of belonging, distance, and silence that students recognize in their own lives, especially when they are navigating identities that don't feel fixed or settled or fully declared. So this is a handout that I provide for students that they need to look at before they come to class. So this is something they would get at the previous lesson. I would hand out to them and it would be their homework assignment. So you can see it has a little overview. Who is Joseph Tusiani? I explain why he's in the course, and then I provide them with helpful resources, which include links, of course, to the Lehman College Library, articles written by people on this panel, and some other articles, and also the YouTube link that we just saw of Joseph Tusiani reading his poem, Song of the Bicentennial. So they begin with this handout, and I think he's especially effective pedagogically because he complicates what students expect from what they expect Italian American literature to look like. He's, as everyone has mentioned up to this point, he's classically trained. He's multilingual. He's deeply engaged with both Italian and American literary traditions. He wrote poetry in English and Italian, Latin, and his native Gargano dialect. He worked extensively as a translator. He understood cultural transmission itself as a form of literary labor. So rather than foregrounding struggle in poetry, his poetry foregrounds authority and form. By authority by form, or authority through form, I mean that Tusiani doesn't establish legitimacy by proving hardship. Instead, authority comes from his depth literary mastery of lyric form. His tone, his restraint, and his multiple literary traditions come together. Unlike the writers that the students previously studied, like D'Angelo, Donato, and Barolini, Tusiani is writing as a literary insider rather than someone attempting to establish literary legitimacy. I would say that especially with D'Angelo and Di Donato. So these poems speak from a position of cultural authority rather than arguing for it. So for students, this matters. Many of them, where they come from their own families or different backgrounds or communities shaped by historical displacement, they don't always see themselves reflected in narratives of struggle alone. So Tusiani can show them that identity can be articulated, again, through reflection, mediation, and form, especially in situations where belonging is provisional, layered, or constantly being reorganized or re-recognized. So here are the poems that I've chosen for this lesson. There are 3 of them: Song of the Bicentennial, Ethnicity, and the Letter Never Sent. I give them key points to keep in mind about the poems. So I give them ideas to keep in mind as they're reading. These are some of the prompts that I give them. And I give them some guiding questions for discussion too. How does Tusiani use of lyric poetry change our understanding of what Italian-American literature can be? So the other thing I do is I very explicitly give them direction on how to begin their exploration of the poems. I ask them to read them and to underline anything that stands out to them. Not even if they don't know why, but just something that resonates with them personally, or that it seems it might be thematically important. And this does 2 things. First, it lowers their entry barrier. It lowers their hesitance to approach poetry if they're not, especially if they're not used to dealing with it. And it also validates their personal resonance as a starting point for analysis. It's not the end of it, it's the starting point. So in my experience, it's been especially important in classrooms where students bring very different backgrounds to and frameworks to the text. So everything in the lesson grows outward from what the students initially recognize or notice in their first readings of it. So here's my lesson plan. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but as I said, I structured around 3 short poems: Song of the Bicentennial, Ethnicity, and The Letter Never Sent. And I asked students, like I said, read all these poems with the overarching questions in mind. How is identity being articulated here? What kind of voice is speaking? And what work is the poem asking the reader to do? I selected Song of the Bicentennial because it functions as a public lyric. It allows us to think about Italian-American identity as positioned in relation to national identity, national celebration, and how pride, belonging, and distance can coexist in a singular voice. I choose ethnicity because its conceptual clarity and its restraint. It offers no story of origin or arrival, which makes it especially useful for helping students think about identity as a condition or position rather than a narrative that must be explained. And finally, The Letter Never Sent turns inward and allows us to focus on silence, withheld communication, and emotional distance. It asks students to consider how meaning can be carried not only through what is said, but through what remains unsent or unsaid. So together, these poems move specifically from a public voice in the Song of the Bicentennial to a conceptual definition in the poem Ethnicity, and to a private address in The Letter Never Sent. So it gives students a framework for thinking about lyric poetry as flexible and a powerful way of expressing identity in contexts where belonging is unstable. So again, here's my lesson plan. I'm not going to go over it line by line, but I do want to highlight how the discussion unfolds and what prompts I give, and what types of responses they tend to elicit from the students. So again, students must. The first one is the Song of the Bicentennial. I give a mini lecture first, so I go over some basic background on Tusiani. And then close reading number 1, we do as the whole class. So this one is the Song of the Bicentennial. So for Song of the Bicentennial, I ask the students first to share their underlying words or phrases, and I guide them through these questions. Who is speaking? How Italian Americans are positioned in relation to the bicentennial, and whether the tone is celebratory, critical, or ambivalent. So when I do this in class, students most often describe the speaker as representative a representative voice rather than a purely individual one. And when they talk about tone, they frequently identify ambivalence rather than celebration or protest. And to support these claims, they consistently cite lines such as two languages, two lands, perhaps two souls, focusing on the hesitation between perhaps and am I a man or two strange halves of one? So this is consistent. These are the same lines that get picked up by the students, even those who haven't had much experience with analysis of poetry. So that's what usually in the actual classroom, I would go on next to the poem Ethnicity. But for our purposes here, I'm going to skip over it for now. And that one I would do in small groups. So I would go from the whole classroom to small groups. And then the final close reading would be with the letter never sent, which is the most intimate of the poems. And I do that in pairs. So for the letter never sent, the prompt asks students to identify the implied recipient, to explain why the letter is never sent, and consider how silence functions as meaning. So the students commonly identify the place itself, the mountain, as the recipient and argue that the letter remains unsent because words are insufficient or because silence itself is a form of preservation. They support these interpretations by citing lines such as, I keep you folded in my silence, and words stop at the edge of the sea, which they read as evidence that distance and restraint carry emotional weight. So if you indulge me now, I thought I'd go over the exercise on ethnicity that I do with the students as an example. Given the technological restraints of this, I'm not going to try and ask people to participate. I think it'd be too hard to mute and unmute and answer that. But I thought maybe on your own, people could see how they would answer these prompts. And then I can share what I typically receive from students, and maybe you can compare for yourselves what your responses were. I'm going to try to share the poem now. Let me see if I can switch that. So you can read it for yourself. I mean, it's a beautiful poem. It's actually in a classic Petrarchan sonnet form, which some of the more advanced students might see or not. So this is the poem I would put up for them. And again, the questions would be, first start out by underlining a couple of phrases or words or something that just stands out to you, that resonates with you. And then I ask them to choose one interpretive lens. So either the definition, how does this poem define ethnicity, or the tone? Is the poem, assertive, defensive, reflective, or instructive? The form, how does its brevity or its formal structure contribute to its authority? And also the audience, who needs to read this poem. So, and I'll just quickly share some of the reflections I got for the students. So one of the most commonly underlined phrases or words is letter and spirit of my simple right. So this one comes up most often. I think students say it sounds definitive and confident rather than emotional or narrative. And how does the poem define ethnicity without narrating? Students point out how it's something inherent and enduring, not something created by migration or circumstances. And this line is what they usually cite. So I discovered what was in me, what in me was bright long before brightness was allowed to shine. So there's this sense of, well, he's claiming ethnicity. He's not defining. He's saying it's something within him. And also this line, brother, you came from Erin, I from Rome, and others started hence. But what of that? So here ethnicity is defined not by a specific place of origin, but it's a shared human condition of movement and belonging. So most people see it as reflective and assertive. They note that now, only now, the truth I understand. It's a very strong declarative sentence, and able at last to trace and underline letter and spirit of my simple right. So they say it shows confidence and clarity rather than defensive-ness. So the poem doesn't argue with an imagined opponent. It states its position clearly. So, I mean, I could go on, but I just wanted to foreground that and talk about, what my experiences have been. So who needs to be this poem? They also point out a broad audience needs to hear this poem. It says, brother, you come from Erin, I from Rome. So it's not addressing, it's broadly addressed to people more universally. So, just to wrap up here really quickly, By the end of the class, I think they've practiced close readings across 3 lyric registers. They've seen that Italian American identity, and by extension, ethnic identity more broadly, it doesn't have to be narrated in struggle to be meaningful. And then the homework I give them reinforces the work they've done in class. They're given 3 separate potential writing assignments that they can choose from. So quickly, I just want to end where I began. So Tusiani matters today because his poetry gives students language for complexity without requiring resolution. Many students across all different backgrounds are navigating layered identity, typical situation today, that they don't fit neatly into a single narrative. So Tusiani shows that identity can be articulated through tone, through address and form, and especially in moments where it cannot be neatly resolved or fully declared. And that silence carries meaning, and that restraint can be authoritative. So for students today, this thought is not only literary, it's transferable. So for me, I think Tusiani teaches students that Italian American literature doesn't only survive through story, it can endure through form, and it can speak to people of many different backgrounds. So that's my experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. And Carla will stay on and do some translation, for which we are very thankful to do this very complicated and onerous thing of simultaneous translation. We're going to move now to Italy, and Sergio D'Amaro, who is president of the Amici di Joseph Tusiani Centro Studi di San Marco in Lamis. And Sergio, are you there?
Sono qui.
Okay, Sergio, che bel manifesto.
Posso andare?
Sì, cominci.
Ringrazio moltissimo naturalmente per l'invito e per essere in questo gruppo molto scelto di studiosi e di amici. Devo pregare probabilmente la professoressa Simonini o anche Marguerite Zappa, non so, perché con Margaret ci siamo sentiti e ci siamo visti naturalmente qui a San Marco in Lamis, e quindi posso chiedere all'uno e all'altro, però se la professoressa Simonini vuole, magari io comincio e poi naturalmente mi fermo al momento giusto per la traduzione, chiaramente, no? Allora, io...
Yes.
Ecco.
I can begin. Professor Sergio D'Amaro, he is thanking everyone for being a part of this with all these esteemed selected scholars, and he is going to go forward. He's going to ask either me or Marguerite Zappa to help him with the translation as we move forward. Prego.
Bene. Allora, io leggerò magari quello che ho preparato in modo tale che la cosa possa essere più sintetica. Prego, Prof.
He's going to read
Prof.
He's going to read his prepared remarks so that we can go forward in a more synthetic and concise way. Prego.
Ok, dunque devo naturalmente illustrare la nascita e lo sviluppo del centro intitolato a Joseph Tusiani qui a San Marco in Lamis. La cosa risale a molti anni fa ormai, e cioè al 2008, quando decidemmo con degli amici di costituire intanto un'associazione e poi di dare vita attraverso questa associazione al Centro Studi, perché avevamo già formato un fondo dedicato a Joseph all'interno di un centro immigrazione che il comune di San Marco in Lamis aveva attivato già nel 2000. Prego, professoressa.
Okay.
Prego, prof.
Sergio, Professor Damarro is talking first about the founding of the Tusiani Study Center. He's saying it was established only recently. I think it's 2008 is the date he gave, and it goes back to the creation of an archival collection dedicated to Tusiani that became part of the Documentation Center on the History and Literature of Immigration, founded in the municipality of San Marco in Lamis. Prego.
Quindi abbiamo cominciato con parecchi anni fa e poi naturalmente abbiamo accompagnato lo sviluppo di questo centro con varie iniziative, chiaramente, quindi attraverso incontri, attraverso convegni, attraverso pubblicazioni. E abbiamo arricchito moltissimo anche la dotazione sia libraria, sia dei libri, e quindi dei testi tusiani, sia anche della parte che riguardava l'archivio, cioè le carte sciolte, tutto ciò che poteva interessare allo sviluppo, diciamo così, del centro studi stesso. Prego, prof.
So he's speaking about how this has developed over 20 years' time, and it's been a process of collecting different materials for the archive, building it, emphasizing his work. Sì, e prego, per l'archivio parla dei contributi di varie persone che hanno contribuito all'archivio, sì?
Contribuito. Sì, ecco, infatti per la costituzione di questo archivio, quindi per avere tutte queste carte, anche però la parte libraria, la parte libri, naturalmente ci siamo avvalsi soprattutto dell'aiuto di Cosma Siani, che forse voi sapete, sicuramente sapete, era in contatto con Joseph già da quando era un ragazzo praticamente, perché la sua famiglia era amica proprio di Joseph già dai secondi anni 50 del Novecento. Quindi lui poté accumulare tutto questo materiale a partire praticamente dalla fine degli anni 60 fino naturalmente a oggi, quando però questo archivio che lui aveva costituito molto denso e molto importante, poi per ragioni come dire, di forza maggiore è stato trasferito a San Marco presso un altro centro documentazione tenuto dal professor Motta. Prego, prof.
Okay. He's talking once again about the accumulation of all these different archival materials, which include books, many, many different types of materials, and how they've come to be. One of the most important contributors is Cosma Siani, who is the professor of English language and translation at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, who is very instrumental in helping with the collection of these archives. She's known Professor Tusiani way back in his career, I think until the 1950s, he said. So the materials represent an arc of time from the end of the 1960s through today. And for logistic reasons, it's been transferred to another area. This, I believe, è stato trasferito al Documentation Center, il centro? Centro di documentazione, sì?
Sì, yes. Centro di documentazione dell'emigrazione. In realtà questo era un centro.
So it's been transferred to the Documentation Center on the History and Literature of Immigration because of its size and so that it can be better maintained there. And it was transferred with Motta. Professor Motta, I believe, is the one who also translated his work from the Gargano dialect to Italian, correct? Sì.
Sì. Dunque, quindi la prima, diciamo, le prime iniziative, anzi tutte le iniziative sono state accompagnate anche dalla realizzazione di una rivista che si chiama Frontiere. Io posso far vedere naturalmente anche l'ultimo numero finora uscito. Ecco, questo, che ho mandato in PDF e che mandiamo in PDF anche all'estero per farla conoscere naturalmente. La rivista esiste da 20 anni e più praticamente, ma solo da una decina d'anni ha acquisito una diciamo, immagine e come dire, uno spessore più ampio, con la partecipazione e con il contributo di molti studiosi, anche di scrittori, di critici. Cito uno per tutti che voi sicuramente conoscete, Martino Marazzi,
Sì.
dell'Università Statale di Milano. Prego,
Okay.
prof.
Okay, so the professor is speaking about the many initiatives that have accompanied the development of the archives. And one of the most important things has been the creation. They've been cataloged and produced in this scholarly journal called Frontiera, which he showed to everyone just now. It's available in a PDF format. It's been around for 20 years, the journal, but more recently it's gotten more depth, more growth, more exposure. It's begun through because of its scholarly contributions that have been published within its pages. He pointed out in particular the scholar and critic Martino Marazzi, who is well known for his work on Italian-American literature, has been a contributor to this journal. So it's an important journal, important scholarly journal that is affiliated with the archives that support Tusiani's work and help continue to spread scholarly information about him. Prego.
Bene, ecco, uno dei primi appuntamenti importanti qui in Italia per ricordare, per omaggiare, per riconoscere in tutto il suo spessore culturale Tusiani è stata la 3 giorni che si è svolta a Roma nel maggio del 2004 per gli 80 anni, per naturalmente festeggiare gli 80 anni dell'autore che fu con noi per 3 giorni a Roma, infatti, e ebbe naturalmente come dire, un trattamento veramente eccezionale da parte anche del Comune di Roma. Con la presenza, tra l'altro, nella sala famosa, della sala Giulio Cesare del Consiglio Comunale di Roma, del grande linguista che voi sicuramente conoscete, Tullio De Mauro.
Okay.
Quello fu un appuntamento molto importante. Prego, prof.
Okay, so he's talking about one of the first important appointments or turning points in their activities was a conference that was organized in Rome, 3 days in Rome in March in 2004 in recognition of the 80th birthday of the poet Joseph Tusiani. And it was very well received because there was involvement of the public as well. And it was held in a very important room, the Sala Giulio Cesare, and it's part of the government chambers, I think, in Rome, correct? And one of the most important contributors was well-known scholar Tullio De Marco, sì? Ho fatto bene? Tullio
De Mauro.
Tullio De Mauro, one of the most important contributors
in linguista, uno dei più grandi linguisti italiani,
one of the greatest Italian linguistics professors.
Certo. Un secondo grande appuntamento con Joseph e naturalmente come attività del centro stesso fu la pubblicazione di un omaggio speciale per i suoi 90 anni e io ho qui il volume appunto che come dire, lo fece eternare, diciamo, fece lasciare permanente, diciamo, questo ricordo e si chiama, come vedete, scusate il mio inglese, 18 Splendor Health. Cioè ho compiuto 18 lustri, perché lui amava, tra l'altro, è una frase naturalmente ad effetto, amava naturalmente, come dire, avere il conto della sua età non per anni, ma per lustri, per cercare naturalmente di diminuire la sua età. Quindi aveva 18 anni.
So
Prego, prof.
Professor D'Amato is showing us a special edition of Frontiera that came out. And another important activity was the publication in Frontiera of this collection in celebration of his 90th birthday year. So, and he talks about the lustri, how, you know, his Professor Margherita, can you give me a hand with this one?
Not a professor, but 18 lustri, because he would say I'm 18 years old. When lustri, each lustri is 5 years. So 18 times 5, 90.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Allora, sono stato bocciato in inglese.
No.
Sono stato bocciato. Ok. Un altro
grazie,
incontro che noi facciamo come centro studi fu l'incontro fatto con Marisa Fenoglio, una scrittrice molto conosciuta italo-tedesca, che purtroppo era perché è morta qualche anno fa, la sorella del grande scrittore italiano Beppe Fenoglio, quello del Partigiano Giorni e dei 23 giorni della città di Alba. Fu un incontro molto cordiale e riuscirono tutti e due, siccome erano cultori, diciamo, del bel canto, quindi del canto lirico, ed erano appassionati, insomma, di opere liriche, intonarono insieme un'aria musicale, tutti e due. Fu un bel incontro anche dal punto di vista, diciamo, canoro.
Oh, wow.
Prego, prof.
Yeah, so this is another interesting encounter that they had. Part of the work of the Institute there is with Marisa Fenoglio, who is recently deceased Fenoglio, a recently deceased Italian-German writer who was the sister of Beppe Fenoglio. And they, with Tusiani, Joseph Tusiani, they both were lovers of music, as Marguerite Zappa had talked about in her own presentation there. And they loved lyric opera and the bel canto. So they actually sang together a piece. Yeah. Quale aria? Qual era l'aria che hanno cantato?
Benissimo. Bene. Dunque, volevo poi, sintetizzando però, perché naturalmente la storia sarebbe molto più lunga, venire, diciamo, all'ultimo appuntamento. Sono stato lungo? Stato lungo?
No.
Allora, venire all'ultimo appuntamento, che è stato naturalmente 2 anni fa per il centenario, quando noi abbiamo fatto un convegno, o meglio, una rassegna di 4 incontri, di 4 diversi incontri tra San Marco in Lamis, San Giovanni Rotondo e Foggia. Cioè praticamente coprendo tutta l'area del Gargano e anche della provincia di Foggia, quindi facendo conoscere meglio anche il nome, confermando il nome naturalmente di Joseph all'interno della comunità. E ne è venuto fuori questo volume di atti che noi abbiamo pubblicato con l'editore Mucci, con l'editore Besa di Nardò, un volume di atti che naturalmente raccoglie tutti i contributi di vari studiosi che si sono alternati in questa rassegna. Prego, prof.
Okay, so another important event that took place 2 years ago in celebration of Joseph Tusiani's 100-year anniversary of his birth were 4 different encounters, 4 different events that took place in different parts of Gargano and Foggia. The idea was to present Joseph Tusiani, to spread information about him, and awareness of his work in these different parts around the region there. And what resulted from those 4 different events was a volume of all the contributions. They collected the contributions from the various scholars presented at these 4 different events in celebration of his 100-year anniversary. And that is now a volume that is collected with all those scholarly contributions that...
Sergio, anche io in Italia, quando vengo in Italia vengo a San Marco in Lamis.
Benissimo, ti
No,
aspettiamo.
forse porto tante persone volontari del Casa Italia con me.
Bene,
Allora,
bene, bene.
grazie per questo lavoro molto
Ok,
importante.
grazie a voi molto. Molte grazie anche a voi. Onorato di essere con voi.
Grazie, professore. Spero di aver fatto
Now
un lavoro
we're going to move
discreto.
to Matteo Coco. Matteo is a professor, and he has a personal story about his contact with Joseph Tusiani, and he will speak in Italian, and Carla will translate. Matteo, benvenuto.
Grazie, buona serata. Innanzitutto grazie per l'invito e grazie per avermi dato questa possibilità, perché per me parlare di Joseph, essere amico di Joseph è un onore grandissimo. Però in premessa permettetemi, devo chiedere alla Simonini naturalmente di aiutare anche me con la traduzione. In premessa devo fare memoria di una persona, mio nonno Angelo, che è a Chicago, è vissuto 17 anni, dal 1924 al 1941, e ha come all'epoca muratore costruito molte case vostre di questa città.
Okay. Signor Mario Coco first wants to thank everyone for Matteo wants to thank everybody for participating in this, and thanks to Dominic for inviting him. And he wants to say, speaking about Tusiani and having been a friend of him is always an honor. That's how he started. He also said before he got into his presentation, he wanted to recognize his grandfather Angelo, who lived in Chicago for 17 years, from 1924 to 1941, and was a muratore. He was a builder. So he wanted to begin by acknowledging his ancestry and his attachment to Chicago that way. Prego.
E su questo ricordo devo iniziare dalla musica. Lucia di Lammermoor è un'opera in 3 atti di Gaetano Donizetti sul libretto di Salvatore Cammarano, che è tratto da Bride of Lammermoor di Walter Scott. E Gaetano Donizetti è una presenza costante a Chicago, soprattutto attraverso la Lyric Opera of Chicago, che mio nonno naturalmente frequentava. Però dico questo perché per Joseph il paradiso, dove pensiamo che sia, sarebbe stato tutto luce e musica, armonia melodiosa. In effetti lo dice, e questo, se mi fai vedere, ascolti tu mia terra, mi condivido con voi il libretto, l'opuscoletto del testo con cui poi vinse in inglese il Greenwood Prize. Lo vedete? Sì. E quindi questo è il testo in italiano di quella composizione che vinse il Greenwood Prize, e a un certo punto conclude: io sento che è segno d'aurora questo brusio tra le cime, quest'alito caldo di rosa, che è luce e che è suono. Quindi, come vedete, sempre Tusiani ha pensato che il paradiso sarebbe stato luce e musica, e quindi questa armonia melodiosa.
Okay, let me try and catch all that. Matteo Coco is talking about Lucia di Lammermoor here in Chicago, going back to his grandfather being here, and the lyric opera, and the presence of Gaetano Donizetti's opera, Lucia di Lammermoor, which is, of course, based on the novel by Sir Walter Scott. And he is relating it to Joseph Tusiani's belief in what is paradiso, what is paradise, what is heaven. And paradise is the combination of light, music, melody, and harmony, he's saying. And he's showing us here the Italian version of the poem for which he won the Greenwood Prize, correct? And he's talking about it, emphasizing his definition of paradise, of heaven, being through music, through these elements of music. Again, light, music, melody, and harmony. Prego.
Ok, dico questo, dicevo per dire che Tusiani conosceva bene le opere musicali, che gustava dal palchetto del Metropolitan messogli a disposizione da Michael, che ho visto collegato e che saluto, e dal palchetto del Metropolitan lui seguiva tutte queste opere liriche perché era una cosa che gli piaceva molto. Canticchiava pure, come ha ricordato Sergio D'Amaro, insieme alla Fenoglio, e insieme alla Fenoglio io ricordo che cantò la Casta Diva della Norma di Vincenzo Bellini, un'aria iconica, diciamo, e noi stessi, quando siamo stati da Joseph per il suo 90°, lui ci ospitò per la Bohème di Giacomo Puccini.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Signor Coco is talking about he's emphasizing again how well Joseph Tusiani knew opera. And he had his own seat at the Met, and where he followed all the performances. And he sung as well. There was an instance where he sung one of the arias from Bellini's Norma. And then later on his 90th anniversary, an aria from Bohème. Sì, ho fatto bene, cioè lui stesso ha cantato queste arie, sì, dalla Norma.
Dalla Casta Diva della Norma di Vincenzo Bellini,
right.
Insieme a Marisa Fenoglio, sorella del più noto Beppe.
Okay, so he's referring back to the same anecdote that Sergio D'Amaro shared with us, where the two of them, Marisa Fenoglio and Louis, sang together this aria from opera. Mm-hmm.
Infatti, in un'occasione, quando venne da noi a scuola, io insegno italiano e storia, in quella al Giannone di San Marco in Lamis, che è stata anche la scuola in cui ha studiato Joseph, ebbene, lui ha affermato sempre che la musica era un aspetto fondamentale della sua vita, anche perché lui stesso, avete mostrato una foto prima, ho visto, lui stesso sapeva suonare il mandolino, e mi permetto di dire che questo aspetto della poesia tusianea andrebbe approfondito. Lo stanno facendo già i professori Raffaele Cera ed Emilio Bandiera, ma diciamo, è un argomento che potrebbe essere argomento di tesi per uno che volesse approfondire l'interesse musicale di Joseph.
Okay. So also, Signor Coco is a professor of Italia Storia, and Joseph Tusiani, il Tusiani faceva parte, anche lui ha studiato alla stessa scuola di lei?
Sì, ha studiato allo stesso liceo in cui ho studiato io.
Okay, and Joseph Tusiani studied
e
at
dove
the same...
attualmente io insegno.
Okay, so he went to the same school as Signor Coco, and it's the school at which now Signor Coco now teaches history and Italian. And he always talks about how when he came to the school to speak, was an aspetto fondamentale, that music was a fundamental aspect of life. And he refers also back to what we learned earlier about how he knew how to play the mandolin. And he is Signor Coco is putting out there that this is an aspect of his poetry that could be further investigated. It could be a thesis or an investigation between the influence of his musical background and his poetry, how his musical self influenced his poetry.
Questo che vedete è un testo che gli dedicò Don Michele Giuliani, che per tutti i giovani dell'epoca era un po' il maestro di musica e quelli che li accompagnava, anche perché Joseph ha scritto per padre Michele Bonfitto e ha scritto anche per altri musica sacra e altre musiche, diciamo, che naturalmente potrebbero essere valorizzate. Andando indietro nel tempo, però, devo dire che io ho conosciuto Tusiani per Flora che è il primo libro di Joseph pubblicato in America dal papà e naturalmente poi distribuito. E di recente ho trovato il poemetto In Isciolti dedicato ad Amedeo di Savoia, che oggi è impossibile e difficilissimo trovare. Questo è il testo di Flora, che è il primo libro di poesie di Joseph.
Ok, non vediamo solamente... well, he was talking about works that Joseph Tusiani wrote for Don Michele Bonfatto. He wrote sacred music for him, and he's also referring back to his first encounter with Joseph Tusiani's poetry through the collection Flora, which was his first book that was published and distributed in America. And he said he's talking about having found within it a poem dedicated to Amadeo di Savoia, which is very difficult to find today. Ma lei ha una copia di questa poesia dedicata ad Amadeo di Savoia, sì?
Sì, ho una copia, l'ho trovata di recente, forse sono uno dei pochi che ha questo libretto, questo opuscoletto che viene annunciato proprio in Flora.
Ok, so he
Se
has
state
probably...
vedendo, c'è scritto... State vedendo?
No, vediamo solamente un elenco dei documenti.
Ah, ok, un attimo.
Le piccole immagini.
Quelle di prima non le hanno viste.
Matteo?
Sì, quelle di prima le avete viste?
No, vediamo solamente...
Matteo?
Sì?
Tusiani ebbe problemi con la censura fascista riguardo questo poemetto giovanile.
Sì, in effetti poi non fu più diffuso ed è stato solo pubblicato in pochissime copie.
Ok. Adesso lo vediamo, sì. Okay, so this is the cover of that poetry collection, Flora, and within it there was, I guess, a hint at this other poem dedicated to Amadeo di Savoia, which Signor Coco has since found. He has one of the rare copies. It's in some sort of small brochure or booklet form. So this is an interesting find.
Io quindi dicevo, ho conosciuto attraverso questo primo libro Joseph, ma in più l'ho conosciuto perché per l'amicizia con mio zio, il fratello di mia madre, in pratica Tusiani era nostro amico di famiglia, con Matteo Vigilante, che ha seguito i suoi primi passi americani e al quale ha dedicato l'Esule, la poesia Esule, Imbeccato in luce del 1949. Questa è la prima lettera che Tusiani scrive a Matteo Vigilante subito dopo essere arrivato in America, e se fate caso è del 9 settembre 1947, lettera che io conservo. Dicevo, lettera che io conservo e nella quale, essendo la prima lettera, parla delle impressioni immediate che ha avuto dell'America durante quel periodo. Parla anche dei primi passi e dei primi successi scolastici di Michael, dei suoi alunni, dei suoi programmi che prevedevano Dante, soprattutto, dei suoi alunni, per esempio come Cori Aquino, che poi è stata presidente delle Filippine, è stata una sua alunna, e,
Oh.
e di altri personaggi, per esempio come quando ha conosciuto Giuseppe Borgese, di cui parla proprio il professore Motta, e ultimamente, in questi giorni, in queste settimane, è uscito un libretto di Motta, Le strette della memoria, che parla appunto di alcuni aneddoti che riguardano Joseph. E quindi anche del Motta ha dedicato un libro al rapporto con Borgese.
Okay, well, there's a lot to cover there. So Professor Coco talks about his family relationship to Tusiani through an uncle of his and how they have a long-standing relationship. A poem, Esole, that came out in 1949 was dedicated to, I believe, someone within his family group there. I didn't quite catch everything. And he showed us this letter, which is a very important letter. It's one of the first letters that Tusiani sent back to Italy, and it's from his very early impressions. The letter contains his experiences, what he's feeling. He talks about his brother Michael in there, what he's doing, and in particular, he talks about some of his students, one of which was Corazon Aquino, who later went on to become president of the Philippines. So he's got this very interesting letter that has interesting biographical, historical information about Tusiani's first impressions of the United States. And he also talks about Motta, the Professor Motta, who recently dedicated a small book, un libretto, to Tusiani for his thing. Signor Coco, come si chiama il libretto?
Ho finito, vi faccio vedere qualche altra cosa e poi chiudiamo. In questa cartellina ci sono tutte le lettere che lui scrive a zio Matteo, a Matteo Vigilante.
Matteo Vigilante, sì, ok.
Sì, e lettere che io ho riportato in questo libretto, Irrefrenabili Fiamma, e vedete c'è una bella foto di Joseph disegnata da Mario Mentuni. E ancora io conservo tutte le lettere che Joseph ha mandato a me in questo faldone, dal 1978, da quando io ho iniziato a scrivergli e avevo 18 anni, stavo facendo l'ultimo anno di liceo.
Matteo, tu devi fare un libro di queste lettere.
Senz'altro.
Sì. So just to let people know what he...
Puoi pubblicare anche. Ok,
no,
grazie.
Pubblicato, ma andrebbe rifatto perché non ci sono più copie.
Ah sì, ok, grazie Matteo. Dobbiamo andare avanti.
Voglio chiudere, vi voglio ringraziare dicendo che Tusiani va approfondito. Ultimamente ho seguito una ragazza, Francesca, che sta facendo una tesi sul Tusiani, poeta latino. Quindi va indagato, approfondito, conosciuto Tusiani. Noi di questo dobbiamo tener conto e dobbiamo contribuire. E vi lascio con un invito. Vi lascio con un invito. Se venite a San Marco in Lamis, vi accoglierà Joseph seduto sulla panchina vicino la chiesa madre, dove aspetta tutti quelli che si vanno a sedere a fianco.
Facciamo una conversazione.
Vi mostro una cosa bellissima. Mi sono fatto riprodurre la panchina da Nazario Lariccia con Joseph ed è un pezzo unico e vi invito con questo, chiudendo con questo, vi invito tutti a San Marco e Lamis. Sarete nostri ospiti benvenuti.
Wonderful.
Matteo, grazie.
Dominic, can I just give a little?
Sure,
Okay,
finish up.
I just wanted to wrap up what he said. He has two collections of letters. One is written to Matteo Vigilante, which I believe is his relative. So he has a collection of letters that were sent to him, which include that very early one about his primi passi, his first steps in the United States. The second folder he showed us are all the letters that he has exchanged with Joseph Tusiani, beginning with 1978 when Professor Coco was only 10 years old. So he has a full collection of those, and Dominic exhorted him to write a book about them. And at the end, he wanted to give an invitation to everyone. That little statue he held up is a bronze copy of an actual statue that's in front of the Chiesa Madre in town there. And he's inviting everyone, if you come, it'll be there waiting for you, and you can sit right next to him on the bronze bench. And he has an open invitation for people to come and join him there. And the last point he also made is that he's still being studied today, and that he knows of a young woman, he only gave her first name, named Francesca, who is writing her thesis on Tusiani's Latin poems. So I just wanted to give justice to all that he brought out there at the last point.
Excellent. Well,
Okay.
I want to thank you, Carla. You did a great job.
Grazie,
Hai fatto
buona
molto
serata.
bene. Sì. Allora, ciao. From there, we move to, I think, to Arkansas, where Professor Ryan Calabretta-Sajder is waiting. Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to jump it right into the paper because we only have 15 minutes. And let me put my timer on and go. So Joseph Tusiani's masterpiece, The Return, launched his international fame in 1956 and comprises 11 stanzas presented in a quasi-figurative dialogue. The poem was born out of a trip to Italy in 1954, and upon his return, he passed the piece to Francis Winwar, who then entered it into the Greenwood Poetry Prize competition, where it won the 1956 prize. In his introduction to the poet in Poets of the Italian Diaspora, Peter Caravetta claims that Tusiani's work is eminent proof of the psyche split that emigration brings at all levels, from the familial to the social, from the professional to the cultural, end quote, which also Anthony has mentioned earlier today. Traces of Caravetta's argument present itself as early as his first famous poem, The Return, in which the narrator creates an internal debate about his dually faceted life between the United States and Italy. The narrator's inquisitive nature, which is evident throughout the dialogue, establishes a tone of uncertainty that permeates throughout the entire piece and also spills into Il Ritorno, which Anthony also mentioned earlier in the video. That's one of his favorite collections of Tusiani. Il Ritorno is written in Italian. This conflicting sense of uncertainty indirectly, creatively, and even psychoanalytically demonstrates the difficulty of migration in regard to self, peer, and societal identification, themes that are not necessarily unique for accented literature. However, Tusiani's approach and application of themes and motifs filter through a variety of sub-themes, including nature. This award-winning poem opens with a question posed by the narrator, quote, "My cradle land, who suffered? I did not, nor did I ever miss your wonder breeze," end quote. This initial question of suffering is critical to understanding Tusiani's poetry, as it sets the tone for a psychoanalytic reading. The opening line claims a lack of suffering, yet later the reader encounters a contradictory voice. From a linguistic perspective, the fact that the narrator poses the question at all, not to mention within the first line of the poem, already suggests a conflictual nature, though it is unclear whether the sentiment is one of guilt or nostalgia. The poem ends the first stanza with an image of man versus boy. He says, quote, "And the man has outgrown the child my land was here, then here am I." This line confirms a psychoanalytical reading, as the poet himself states that the man has not outgrown his homeland or childhood, which he uses interchangeably in this line. The man who lives in the United States can thus never lose the boy raised in Italy. The idea raises the question of whether the return is a true return or the continuation of the real for the narrator. These three lines take the reader to Lacan's concept of development, in particular his theory of the mirror stage of development, coined in 1936 at the 14th International Psychoanalytic Congress of Marienbad, to the examination and clarification of which he dedicated most of his career. Lacan states, the mirror stage is a phenomenon to which I assign a twofold value. In the first place, it has historical value as it marks a decisive turning point in the mental development of the child. In the second place, it typifies an essential libidial relationship with the body image, end quote. When Lacan uses the term historical value, he is referring to the development process of the mind within the confines of the child, while the structural value deals with the libido and its manifestation of body politics. Later in his career, Lacan attempts to clarify the concept of the mirror stage, stating that through understanding the reflection in the mirror, the individual is able to differentiate the imaginary from the real. Self-identification of the ego, therefore, occurs in the mirror stage. Returning to Tusiani's poem, the poet's boyhood and manhood come together and is returned to his home. The main concept of the poet's persona that wanders and thinks about his homeland is only his thought, as noted in line 6 and later in 52. Even though there is no true conclusion offered in the first part of the poem, one can nevertheless note this return through the Lacanian mirror stage. Even though the narrator lacks a mirror, this dialogue with his homeland can indeed replace the actual reflection of glass, since it is through this reflection on his homeland that he openly ponders his past. At this moment, the narrator experiences both the imaginary and the real, according to Lacan, and he begins his quest to reach the eye. Later in the poem, the poet returns to his thoughts, quote, "And are you, land of love, still watching over my thought that is aching?" End quote. The present participle aching, which defines the poet's thought, once again underscores the negative inner sensation he shares when thinking of his paese materno. The reader can infer from this adjective that his return, at the very least on a philosophical level, if not also on an emotional one, creates a sense of pain for the narrator, a pain that provokes tears in the subsequent two lines. As the narrator is brought to tears, his philosophical pain obviously manifests itself into the physical realm. At one point in the poem, the narrator asks, "Now which of us knows more, or which is happier? I cannot tell." The narrator seems to be weighing his decision of migrating against the amount of happiness he feels. He attempts to justify his happiness, yet he maintains, quote, "I do not know," end quote. This inability to affirm or deny highlights the narrator's uneasy decision to leave his homeland, a decision he keeps questioning without providing a clear-cut answer. This uneasiness with Italy continues when he asks, quote, "My land, do you still hear me?" The narrator's query expresses both a desire and a concern about being heard. Without any confirmation, the poet continues his address to Italy, and he later affirms, quote, "I know you hear me still," end quote. This assumption of being heard through apostrophe is hopeful at best, underscoring the emotional aspect for the narrator, but more importantly, for the reader. The hope that Italy hears the narrator is crucial for his relationship with his homeland, because the reader later learns that, quote, "Am here reborn and sing to the air of the mountain and the plain," end quote. Rebirth in and of itself is essential for the narrator, and its occurrence in Italy is even more meaningful. Although he attempts to distance himself from his feelings with his homeland, it is in Italy that he encounters a rebirth. The poem, however, ends with a slightly more negative tone. "Ah, too late, it's too late. What was gold is now crocus, and the sheen that was morning is life to be felt, no more seen. Into the sea of loveliness the night is lost and gained, and all my cares are drowned." With the passing of time, the reader, through a series of images, understands that what used to be glorious now is no longer so. First through color imagery, which shifts from gold to crocus, and then with the use of time from morning to night. Before we arrive at the final line, the enjambment is striking, particularly with the breaks between is life to be felt, no more seen. The line break here is harsh and underscores an emotional break. The change from morning to night, from birth to death, and from past to present. Again, the enjambment into the sea of loveliness the night plays with the reader's emotions. The line leaves the reader hanging linguistically and emotionally on sea because of the plethora of connections it can offer. In a psychoanalytic reading, water reminds the reader of the womb and thus rebirth, yet once the reader arrives at the phrase of loveliness, the tone changes to create a positive feeling until the rest of the line is read. The end of the line, quote, the night is lost and gained, quote, once again changes the mood of the poem into negative, implying that the sea has engulfed the night. Thus, the opposition between the past, represented by positive images, and present, described with a sense of loss, perpetuates the internal conflict present in the poet's persona. This negative sentiment concludes the poem, ending with a semi-closure, although not completely, with the last line, quote, and all my cares are drowned, end quote. The ending carries the negative connotation of drowning, particularly in late night water, as opposed to the early morning waters of rebirth. Time proves in this sense to be the narrator's enemy, and in a certain manner creates, or at least underscores, this internal conflict. It seems the narrator must drown his sense of identity, the Lacanian I, in order to become complete. The subject of denial of self-identity, later found in Il Ritorno, will echo themes of Tusiani's first major award-winning poem, The Return. In his collection, Il Ritorno, 1992, the reader is privy to exactly that, a return, this time metaphorically and emotionally, for both the poet and the narrator. As migrant, the narrative voice expresses an adverse tone. In order to analyze this concept, it is crucial to examine the organization, language, and use throughout the lyric collection. Il Ritorno begins with an incipit that recalls the return, quote, Mi ascolti tu, mia terra, end quote, which initiates a new dialogue between the narrator and Italy. Thus, in this instance, the linguistic tongue is Italian instead of English. Using Italian as a narrative voice reorients the poet back to his childhood, and he thereby returns to the mirror stage of his own development. By adopting Italian throughout his entire work, the poet makes a clear statement about his creative, psychological, and emotional state. In fact, there are very few words that are not in Italian, consisting of a dedication in Spanish and a handful of English names from the poet's experiences in the United States. Unlike other migrant authors, Tusiani never bastardizes the Italian in Il Ritorno with Italiese or with English. Rather, he uses pure Italian, calling attention on the trope of return. The work's originality is still ambiguous. In reality, it is the Italian translation of the English question posed midway through The Return. My land, do you still hear me? Though the grammatical difference lays in the use of the adverb still. The absence of still in the incipit may directly confirm, if one examines these pieces in a parallel approach, that his terra is still, in fact, listening, changing the question in Il Ritorno to a rhetorical one. The interpretation of the incipit then offers a unique entry into the collection as a whole. First, it emphasizes the initiation of the dialogue by the poet and the narrator rather than the land itself. He is the one seeking out Italy, which directly represents his past or childhood. The narrator and poet thereby create a relationship with the past, both poetically and personally. Tusiani connects his poetic fame with the collection underscored by that line. Psychoanalytically, the poet-narrator must retreat to his childhood to rediscover, or maybe discover for the first time, his identity. This action of return may appear to be solely linguistic, supersedes the concept of language, as words are always political and carry more power than originally implied. The incipit becomes an organizational tool for Tusiani's collection. As alluded to earlier, it highlights an already initiated discourse, one from the late 1950s, but in looking forward, it sets both tone and structure for the inner dialogue present within the collection. If the incipit ignites the reader to connect the past of the return to this volume, then the organization of the entire collection solidifies this interpretation. Before examining the work, it should be noted that the collection is comprised of 33 poems, with at least one or two allusions to Dante, whose Divina Commedia contains 33 canti for each cantica, aside from the Inferno introductory canticle, and thus it bears witness to the discourse. Moreover, in Christianity, the number 33 reminds the readers of Christ's sacrificial death. If Tusiani is returning to his lingua materna, as an aspect I will address shortly, 33 may very well pay homage to the poet par excellence of the Italian language, or indicate a personal sacrifice founded on death and rebirth. Returning to La Madrelingua, the first poem of the collection is entitled Lingua Materna, while the last is Alla mia Puglia. These two poems serve as bookends, a sort of conceptual alpha and omega, especially through a psychoanalytic lens. The narrator begins this collection in Italian, addressing the concept of his mother tongue, stressing the importance of language. The last poem, on the other hand, pays homage to his actual madre terra, his birth region of Puglia. In a certain regard, then, the poet's return can be interpreted as both private and public by examining the content and order of the collection. In Lingua Madre, there is an intimate return between the poet and his language. Lacan, with numerous linguists and semiologists, argue that language is key in the development of individual identity, bridging the imaginary period with the symbolic. Thus, Tusiani's return to one of his mother tongues can be read as a rebirth, or at the very least, a reconsideration of his identity. However, Tusiani's choice to begin this collection with a poem entitled Lingua Materna seems even grander. It can thus be argued that this first poem reclaims his Italianità by addressing the concept of his mother tongue, and therefore, through this metaphoric return, the poet reclaims his childhood, represented by the language he adopts, and returns the narrator to the symbolic order. Following a Lacanian reading, Tusiani does not choose his linguistic return, rather it chooses him, as the first line of the poem also the collection suggests. Non io a te, sei tu, che a me ritorni. In this first stanza, he does not embrace the return of his language. The imagery is quite negative, describing the return come da cupa grotto, oracolo interrotto di Sabilla. This tone continues in the second stanza. Se questi accenti di favela strane io potessi scordare. Even before forgetting the speech, he recalls Nine Nanne Care, or sweet lullabies. The concept of return, specifically to one's youth, is significant for the development of the psyche. This return should help in the process of self-identification, according to Lacanian psychoanalysis. But as one will soon note, it creates further tension in the narrator. He attempts to regain his identity through his youth, or at least through his memory, yet by discussing the concept of language, the narrator begins to bring the private, his memories, to the public, his language. In the final stanza, the tone transforms again. Although the narrator seems put off by the sound of Italian, he still finds comfort in it. Quote, forse più pure e semplice risuoni, all'orecchio non più ma solo al cuore, per il contrasto che ti fa più dolce e per l'incontro che ti fa più buona. Ironically, the public sound of his mother tongue is no longer pure to hear, evidencing a change in the narrator, his integration into his Anglophile world, and a movement away from the real of his birth. Even though oral expression is unwelcome by the narrator, he does not completely detach himself. Instead, nostalgia, or his past, is best left in the heart, and he accepts this conflicting interpersonal reality. In this matter, the narrator's attachment with Italy remains in the realm of the private. And I'm going to move to the conclusion. As Tusiani is a multilingual migrant author, it is prudent to conclude this piece, and the piece is a lot longer. I look at other poems from Il Ritorno, of an accented cinema of it is prudent to conclude this piece with the concept of the accent. Hamid Nafishi, author of an accented cinema, exile and diasporic filmmaking, argues that filmmakers working in non-native lands can never lose their accent. Visually and culturally, they remain connected in some way to their native filmic tradition. Nafishi's theoretical model was originally created to analyze the medium of film. However, the correlation with accent and language is so closely related that its theoretical utilization in literature offers a unique interpretation. Although Joseph Tusiani consciously wrote various works in his dialect, English, Latin, and Italian, he also appears to remain connected to his native land, his madre terra. In Il Ritorno, he claims that la lingua materna found him, and thus maybe it did. Whether Tusiani cannot decide or is unwilling to decide which world he belongs to, his native and adopted worlds clearly intersect, situating him beyond, or perhaps more precisely, within the margins. As Caravetta stated, quote, his work is particularly interesting for the evolution of its conflicted relationship to both Italy and America, both of which he has deeply loved, ever aware of being at once an outsider and an insider, a condition which has caused him an inner relentlessness and a yearning for a higher unifying locus, end quote. In the case of Tusiani, we may not be able to define him as a traditionally accented author, and although his work's fame definitely transcends the margins, his cultural identity, or the struggle to find one unified identity, is ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a very deep stuff, and it does take knowledge of both languages and 2 time periods. That's really a challenge. So Fred Gardefei is a distinguished professor of English and Italian American Studies at Queens College and the Calandra Institute. And we're glad to have Fred. I always say Fred has read more Italian American literature than anybody I know. And Fred, where does Joseph Tusiani place in literature? What's his place in literature? Go for it.
All right, thank you, Dominic. But much of his presence in American literature comes to us through his poetry, of course, even though, as Felix Stefanelli told us, he is a one-man industry, and so he's really widely a participant in various aspects of American literature, but mostly through his poetry. And for Italian Americans, it really wasn't until Italian Cultural Center of Stone Park, under Father Feccia, published Gente Mia. That's when I first became aware of Joseph. But just a few years later, that publication began a quest for wanting to know more about Tusiani. And a few years later, Paolo Giordano, the late Paolo, Dio Benedica, as we say, republished some of the poems from that first collection, along with 9 other newer poems in something called Ethnicity, Selected Poems. Giordano also included 2 of his early essays on Tusiani in that publication. And because Paolo is not here, I wanted to bring him here. I wanted to conjure him up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that collection, and I'm going to go on to some other aspects of Joe's life and work that I think centers him in the American consciousness. I'm going to end with a poem that he wrote, and let's proceed. Whether privately personal, as to my father and the old chair, or publicly historical, as in the soliloquy of Philip Mazzei or Garibaldi's Candle, Tusiani is a master at capturing multiple dimensions of the immigrant experience. The poet combines the knowledge of a well-versed scholar with the heart of an emotionally honed human to create formalistic poetry of the most ordinary of miracles and the most extraordinary of historical acts. The alienation themes that characterize the early episodic writing of Italian-American novelists, such as Pietro di Donato, as Carla made a great notice to, are crystallized and transcended in Tusiani's work, through which he reaches beyond witness to analyst of that experience. In his Song of the Bicentennial, written in the celebration of America's 200th birthday. Tusiani raised the question of the meaning of Italianità in America and its relation to the immigrant's identity. And he writes, "Then who will solve the riddle of my day? Two languages, two lands, perhaps two souls. Am I a man or two strange halves of one?" In questioning this experience as an immigrant, Tusiani also wonders about those who had immigrated earlier, those who didn't have his abilities to write in either language. More than any other Italian American who has ventured into the arts in America, Tusiani has given voice to those predecessors and reason to begin and continue studying them. In the final stanza of Bicentennial, he writes, "I am the present, for I am the past, of those for their future came to stay. Of those who for their future came to stay, humble and innocent and yet outcast. For this, my life, their death made ample room." And this is a line that when I teach it to my students, they begin to really understand their own situation in the immigrant experience. And as Carla was saying, he is key. He is fundamental. I also use him as a transition from narration to lyric. And the students take to him fantastically. Through such poems, Tusiani takes on the responsibility of speaking for those earlier immigrants. As Giordano tells us, quote, "Tusiani shows the reader that the American cultural milieu has absorbed the superficial and sterile aspects of Italian immigrant culture while never understanding the true character of this populace. It's up to the poet," writes Giordano, "who draws his inspiration from the injustice suffered by his people to assure that their sacrifice will not be forgotten." Later, Tusiani completed 3 volumes of an autobiographical narrative epic. The first one is a novelization of his landmark poem, La Parola Difficile, or the difficult word. The next 2 were La Parola Nuova, the new word, and La Parola Antica, the ancient word. All 3 were written in Italian. As Giordano tells us in a later publication, Tusiani returns to his native language to tell his life story in prose, with 3 volumes that were published 13 years after Gente Mia. Tusiani speaks precisely to that initial impact he had as an intellectual with the United States. In these works, Tusiani examines the major themes that are associated with immigration: spiritually, psychologically, the violent act of division from one's family and native land, which is the first experience of new immigrant, the dreams of the migrant, the prejudice he encounters, the process of Americanization, the question of language, the alienation, and the realization that the New World is not, quote, the land of hospitality he had believed it was. When the immigrant, after a long and wearisome crossing, disembarked at Ellis Island, he was immediately faced with the first major obstacle, a strange language. Tusiani knew, as do most of those born in another country, that the immigration odyssey takes many forms. First and foremost, coming to terms with the actual and physical separation from the country of birth and from family and friends. This most evident element of emigration is initially the most traumatic. When the migrant arrives to the new country, the voyage is not finished. Other voyages must be undertaken in the quest to assimilate into mainstream. I think Brian brought that out quite well with the look at the Ritorno. United States culture was something that fascinated Tusiani, and he realized that the most important way of understanding any culture is through its language. By necessity, the immigrant must immediately begin the journey from one language, Italian, or one of the many Italian dialects, to another, American English. Once the process has begun, he slowly, imperceptibly really begins to lose his native language and the ideas and cultural values that the native language transmits. Tusiani fought against that. He built his career dealing with all these 4 languages that he worked with. A cultural transformation begins to take place, and he starts to lose part of himself. The question then of language, or rather the loss of language, is of primary importance to Tusiani when discussing the experience of immigration. Giordano writes, "It's precisely the unsolved riddle and the feeling of being suspended between two worlds, of not belonging and of navigating between two cultural systems, that I believe pushes Tusiani to return to Italian, the language of his native land, for his autobiography. The resolution is his awareness of being suspended between two worlds, his acceptance of his biculturalism, for which, instead of seeing himself as not belonging to either one or the other, enables him to accept himself as a man of two languages, two lands, two souls. After 40 years, the riddle has been solved. The question posed in the Song of the Bicentennial have now become statements." And Giordano continues, "The consequence of this transformation is that the immigrant, by expressing himself or herself in the acquired tongue, translates not only the language, but this very soul. And in that process of translation, he slowly and unrelentingly begins to change. He now has the language and the culture of two lands, America and Italy. But I ask, in what order? Shouldn't we say Italy and America, America e Italia, e quale ordine però? Non dovremmo dire," Giordano says, "Italia e America." I'm sorry, that's from Tusiani. "America e Italia, in quale ordine però? Non dovremmo dire Italia e America." Tusiani poses these questions because he believes that the immigrant cannot totally assimilate into that adopted culture. Now, throughout his life, Tusiani connected his artistic work to political work. He was certainly a public intellectual and a public artist in that sense. And I'm just going to read a little bit from Martin Luther King's response to Joseph's request that he answer the four questions. You can go consult the original letter, as we know now, in the archives at Lehman College. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. On August 2nd, Italian-born poet Joseph Tusiani requested that Martin Luther King respond to a set of questions for an article to be published in Nigrizia, which was a Catholic journal dedicated to the study of missionary work in Africa. In his reply, King suggested that the Little Rock school integration conflict may have been, quote, "a blessing in disguise," because it forced people to recognize that the desegregation problem had to be met forthrightly. He also blames the federal government, especially the president, for failing to take a strong moral stand. And I'm going to read just a little bit before I get to the final poem. "Dear Dr. Tusiani, I am in receipt of your letter of August 2nd, and I hasten to answer it before leaving town in a few hours. I regret that a very tight schedule at this moment will not permit me to give detailed answers to your questions. Answer to question number 1. In my opinion, the main obstacle to the realization of brotherhood in the United States and other parts of the world is a man's failure to respect the dignity and work of all human personality. The problems facing our world in the area of human relations are chiefly moral." And he goes on to answer all the other questions, but I think the key here is understanding what were those questions that Tusiani asked, and how appropriate they were when he just would give somebody the stature of Martin Luther King. This is in 1959. Posed 4 questions to him. In answer to question number 2, I was certainly disappointed when the Little Rock incident occurred some time ago. It was a shocking demonstration of how one man, through irresponsible action and demagogic tendencies, can lead a whole state into acts of meanness that no normal or rational person would commit. Moreover, it was a tragic revelation of what prejudice can do to the blind visions of men and darken their understanding. And he goes on for more. But now to question number 3. I definitely feel that the present situation is brighter than it was a few years ago. Tusiani is always looking for not only understanding the darkness, but where is the light? Where is the light at the end of it? We are nearer the promised land of integration than we were 10 years ago. It is true that we have more tension in some areas of the South than we had, but this tension is a necessary phase of transition. It is a sign of the progress that we have made. And the final, he asked him, if you were going to add another chapter to your book, what would it be? He says, if I added a chapter to my book, Stride Toward Freedom, I would probably turn to a discussion of the effectiveness of nonviolence in international relationships. It would be my contention that this method must be adopted not merely on the local level in struggles between relatively small groups, but even between nations. And he leaves, he says, as I said, these answers are briefer than I would ordinarily make them. They were given in a great deal of haste. However, I hope they will serve your purpose. I am happy to know that you have chosen me as a subject for your article in the Italian magazine, Iglesia, with every good wish, sincerely yours. And he says, please send me a copy of the article once it appears. So Joseph was definitely engaged, concerned, and acted upon his moral bearings, not just in his poetry, but in his public work. And we need to really get a collection of Joseph's nonfiction, the reviews he did, and so on and so forth. I'm going to conclude with a poem that he wrote. I just happened to find it in the Ethnicity collection. It's called January 1st, 2000. I cannot feign myself as three-dimensional as certainly this morning I woke up. I've just inherited, 'twas not intentional, the merits of the clock I could not stop. Another year, a date fully foreseeable, another century. How old am I? And also, I believe the unbelievable. A new millennium? Che dici mai? Don't tell me that I am the man I was when I last night lay down crepuscular. This triple weight I take only because this very day I've grown more muscular. Almost as Atlas, who upon his shoulders balanced the globe forever and an hour. Year, century, millennium, three boulders I will upbear without steroids power. We forget sometimes he was a quite humorous guy. Or am I still the one I was before a mythical millennium ago? I have aged 1,000 years or more in but one wink. May someone let me know. I feel just like that man, oh, strange event, who with a most amazing riddle met. He stretched his arms to his astonishment. He saw one wholly dry, one wholly wet. For to his left the rain was pouring still, and to his right the sun was now aflame. Or like that other man who reached a rill, crossed it, and to a mossy meadow came, where two strange countries merged and made one land, with those uncharted boundaries in view. He stood in doubt which passport to demand, suddenly to both nations deeply true. A year or a millennium, but which is of the two the more dependable? Neither, I guess, but durable and rich. Meanwhile, I feel, who am the most expendable. I think that poem, not only because it's 26 years ago, January, good thing to look at, but I think it's a great kind of combination of Joseph's the bilingualism that's there, the humor that's there, the philosophy that's there, but it's all formed in this very structured, traditional poetic format. But even he plays with the rhymes. They're not full rhymes sometimes, but they, and so to me, he is, when it comes to literature, he is the master experimenter, but also the master of maintaining a tradition that goes back to the very people that he translated. All right, I'm going to end
Excellent. Okay, that's a good finish. We want to thank everyone who participated throughout. Some questions, comments from anyone out there?
May I say something?
Yes, Michael.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank everyone for their contribution, for the organization. It's a great way to my brother's memory, and I thank everyone. Let me just tell you that the story continues. And I'll give you a little bit of a background to taking 1 minute. When my brother wrote the 3 volumes, the autobiography, his autobiography, I asked him if he would be, willing to translate it for my kids and for future generations. And he refused. He said, no, he says, when you write it once, you're translating, it's difficult. He gave me a dozen reasons why not. He agreed that if I found someone to translate the volumes, he would work with him in doing so. And that's what I did. I commissioned someone. All 3 volumes were translated.
Oh.
And I had, through my corporate contacts, I had an introduction to, at that time, the CEO of Random House, because I wanted Random House to publish it. So he was an Italian, so I thought that was a good thing. His name was, if I recall, Vitali, Alberto Vitali. And I went to see him, and Vitali was very, very nice gentleman. He said, very interesting. He said, but that's not how it works. He says, you have to get an agent decision. You have to get an agent to work on it. So he gave me 2 names. I went back to my brother. My brother was skeptical. He said, who would be interested in this anyway? And of course, he was skeptical of one Italian helping another, but that's another story. So he refused to meet with the agent. Refused. He says, when I'm gone, who will recognize my work? That was his famous line. He didn't want any statues. He didn't want to memorialize his work. And since his passing, of course, now named the villa in San Marco after him, the bench, and of course the Lehman collection. But the story goes on. So if gold should rust, which I think is an exceptional play, through my cousin's mother's side, he was in that movie business. He had the manuscript go to Al Pacino, and Al Pacino liked it a lot. And he scheduled a reading of it at the Actors Studio. One thing led to another. I forgot he was ill and never got done. Now another famous actor is looking at it, because Pacino is, I don't know, these artists, you never know where they stand. But in any case, it is being worked on, and hopefully we'll get the play somewhere off Broadway. That's
wonderful.
And the second thing is, through my cousin, who is in the business, he's doing it's going to take about a year to do, and it started already a couple of weeks ago. He's going to do a special on my brother, which hopefully will be aired on PBS.
Wow.
Because he has contacts there. And that's a national, as everyone knows, TV show. So that's the story, and we keep his memory alive. And all of you have contributed to that, which I very much appreciate. And I will do my part to see whether or not we could extend his memory. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got Maria Rosario who wants to speak.
Okay, yes, I wrote it in the chat. Here in Italy, we have the school system based on autonomy. I got this idea listening to Carla Simonini, especially, where she suggested, proposed to her university students. Tusiani is not a typical topic here in our high schools, and this is really a pity. And our conversations tonight are pointing out to this. I mean, as a Renaissance man, an intellectual, a language expert, and as Professor Fred Gardafi was saying, in times of internationalism, interculturalism, and inclusion, of course, everybody wants to know, even now in Italy, what immigration is really about, without all the prejudice that is going on at the moment. So, yeah, I was just suggesting Tusiani as a topic for the school curriculum. Especially even for the idea that, of dialect. Dialect is being reevaluated here in Italy. The students haven't been taught dialect for years, but now dialect is entering the schools. So Tusiani would be a wonderful topic, and thank you everybody for all the information and wonderful seminar tonight.
Thank you.
And thanks for that comment, especially since you have the perspective of being in higher education or in secondary education in Italy. Any other comments? Anybody else want to be recognized? I think we've got a wonderful production here today that will be on YouTube, and talk about Joseph Tusiani will live on YouTube forever. And so, in a way, the poet never dies. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.